You don't know him, but on the day Jason Norris was baptized, everybody who knew him knew it was a big milestone in his life. That Sunday morning, he had come early to the service. His smile was from ear to ear, and he was glowing. He was tall, and so he was already an impressive figure. He was redheaded, so that made him impressive as well, but it was the fire in his eyes that you could see on that morning. And he was clearly taking a new step in his life. He and I had been working towards that for a little bit of time, and in fact, it all started about 2 years before that moment. I got an email from a guy named Jason who said, "I think I need your church." And I wrote him back and I said, "I think you do." And so we started an email conversation that lasted all of 2 emails back and forth. And in the second one, I said, "Okay, let's meet." And we got together at the Arby's that was right across the street from where this church was. And I met him, and we sat down, we started talking, and he began to tell me his story. And lo and behold, the time he was baptized wasn't the first milestone in his life. There had been a number of previous milestones that led up to that point. And so we were meeting in Arby's, and he was telling me about a couple of the milestones that had happened in his life before then. He had been dating this girl for like 6 years, and he thought he was in love, and she thought she was in love, and they thought they were going to be together for forever, and they just hadn't tied the knot yet. And he didn't really care too much about God. He wasn't raised in a Christian home or anything like that. And then she dumped him out of the blue. And he was bitter. And his heart was torn open and bleeding. And he was in that dark place. That dark place with life and that dark place with God where you say, am I good enough? Am I doing the right thing? Have I really screwed up my life? Did I just waste the last 6 years? And he was in that dark place. And a friend of his had recently started going to church. And she went to a really small church that was desperate for Sunday school teachers at the time. And even though this girl had not made any commitment of faith or anything like that, and was just beginning to learn the Bible herself, that church asked her to teach Sunday school, and she was like, okay. So she was preparing to teach Sunday school for this class of young kids, and was working through the Bible and said to Jason, "Can you help me?" And Jason says, "I don't know anything." And she says, "Okay, then we're together. We're on the same page." So I don't know anything either. So he's never been to church before. He's never opened his Bible before. And he starts meeting with this girl to prepare lessons in the Bible for this Sunday school class. Milestone. In his time there, he was inspired, maybe I should read this book for myself. And he began to read it. And so sitting across the table from me in Arby's, he tells me his story. I was reading in the Gospel of Luke. And I came to that passage. I now know it's in Luke 6. He says, I came to that passage where Jesus says, if you don't forgive your brother when he sins against you, your Father in heaven won't forgive you. And he said, I was convicted. In my heart, I just realized that I had not forgiven this girl for dumping me. My heart was filled with bitterness and anger and darkness, and I hadn't forgiven her. And in that moment, I just knelt down on the ground and my hands clenched. And I said, God, I don't know how to forgive her. I don't. But I know that if I'm going to forgive her, then it's part of the fact that you're going to forgive me. And I need your forgiveness. And so what I'm going to do, God, is I'm just going to open up my hand and release this to you. And so I can't forgive her, but if you forgive me, then maybe you can forgive her through me. And he's on his knees and he's crying and he's opening his hands to God and he says, God, would you please forgive me? And Jesus tells a story about a tax collector who's in this temple and he's beating his chest and kneeling before God and says, God, I'm a sinner. Would you forgive me? And Jesus says, that man is forgiven. So now I'm staring at a real life experience of this. He was in his living room, not in his church or anything else, but he had been reading the Bible. And I'm a pastor, I've been in church my whole life. I was raised in the thing. And here he is sitting across from me telling me a story of reading the Bible, encountering God, and handing his life over to him. And my mouth is hanging wide open. I've never heard this before. Most of the people that I've met who've come to know Jesus have done so because one person told them the story. And here's a guy who's on his own, reading the Bible, and God meets him. That's a milestone. That's the milestone. I looked at him square, and usually in a conversation like that, my next line is, Well, tell me, has there ever been a time in your life when you prayed to receive Jesus as your Savior? Has there ever been a time in your life where you gave your life over to God? And I couldn't ask that next question because he just told me he had. And I was like, dude, you're the first person I've ever met who's come to that place simply from reading the Bible. God is doing something big in your life. A couple years later, we're sitting together preparing for his baptism, and I said, you know, you've never prayed the standard prayer before, but I know your heart, I know your story. Tell me this, would you count that as your starting moment with God? Or do you want to have your starting moment with God right now, and we can pray the technical, whatever it's called, sinner's prayer with each other? Or some people just use baptism as that moment. He says, I want that. So when he came that Sunday morning, he was remembering 2 years ago when he had begged God for forgiveness and knew God had given it to him. And now he was standing in front of a congregation full of people to say, I am clean and I am new. And so the milestone that I experienced and the whole congregation experienced just was one of them. There was a previous milestone in Arby's, and before that there was another milestone in his living room. And all of us have milestones like that, times when we've been in our dark place and God came through. Times when we've been at the top of the mountain and God revealed it was because of his work in our lives. We've all been in different kinds of milestone experiences, and this month I want to ask you to share with me yours. Whether it's on the backside of the Connect card, on our church website, by Facebook, I don't really care. We're just going to go on a journey together of sharing milestone stories. And we all know them when we see them in the lives of other people. When I see a milestone in my kids' lives, I totally know it. Well, I didn't. I used to not know it. But, you know, when I first became a dad, my wife, Jennifer, and her mom and dad had come out and visited us. And they apparently knew all these milestones that I didn't know. Like, it's apparently a milestone that the baby can sit up by themselves. It's apparently a milestone that the baby can roll over. And I was thinking, well, okay, yay. So it's a milestone when the baby smiles. It's a milestone when the baby lifts his head up. It's a milestone when the baby crawls. When it walks, I knew that one. So I remember this one time I was out, I was doing some work, and my in-laws were in the house. Jen was still in the house, still on maternity leave. And I was coming back from wherever I was doing whatever it was I was doing, like preparing something for a worship band I was leading at the time. And I come back, and everybody's all excited, and they're telling me, Charlie rolled over. And I'm thinking, okay. And they're like, no, that's a milestone. That's a major milestone. I'm learning this thing. And so then later on that day, he began to be mobile and was rolling all around the house. And then I knew, yes, something different had happened. So I remember the day Charlie rolled over. I remember the day he took his first steps. I remember the day my daughter spent the night without diapers. I remember, don't tell her I said that. I remember these milestones, first day of kindergarten, things like that. It's easy for me to see milestones in other people's lives. I also have some milestones in my own life. I remember the day I decided to propose to my wife. Of course, I remember the day I proposed, but I remember the day I decided to. I remember the conversation I had with my dad to learn how to budget so that I could earn enough money so that I could buy the ring so that I could propose to this woman. I remember those conversations. I remember the first day I was a pastor. I remember the first day this church started. I have milestones in my memory. And some of them are dark places too. Some of them are the high mountain peaks, and some of them are the dark, low valleys. But where God meets you is a milestone in your life. And so what we're doing this month is we're going to go on a journey together. We're going to share our milestones, we're going to celebrate milestones, and we're going to do it in the context of some major milestones in the Bible. I'm going to take you to some stories that maybe you're not totally familiar with, but they're those milestones that precede the other milestones. So jump with me into the Bible, Hebrews chapter 11. It's printed on your note sheet. It'll be on the screen. We're talking about Abraham. And here's an obvious milestone in his life. People know about the guy named Abraham. Many people do. He's the most famous guy in the Old Testament. Here we go. Abraham. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice, Isaac his son, as a sacrifice. He who had embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, "It is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned." That's a milestone. Because see, God had said to Abraham, I want you to sacrifice your only son, Isaac, to me. And Abraham got to the place where he has the knife up in the air and he's ready to come down on his son and kill his own son. And God says, no, that's just a test. Hang on. I provided a substitute over here. So you get the substitute, the ram that was caught in a thicket over here. You bring that ram, you sacrifice that ram, and you know that I'm the God who provides substitutes. I'm the God who steps into the place, who provides so that you can keep your commitment to me. You don't have to do it on your own. I'm the God who provides for that. Abraham learned a lesson there. That was a major milestone in his life, but that wasn't the first one. His first milestone was back in Genesis 12. And in Genesis 12, God speaks to him. He says, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to make your name great. You're going to be a blessing to everybody. In Genesis chapter 13, there's another milestone. God's voice comes to Abraham somehow, and he says to him, I'm going to give you all this land that you can see. So in Genesis 12, God says, I'm going to bless you. All I want you to do is get up from here and go to this other place where I take you, and then in that other place, I'm going to give you all this land. Then in Genesis 13, he says, look at the land that you're now in. I'm going to give it all to you. Then in Genesis 15, God comes up to him another time, and he says, personally, now I'm going to give you a son. I'm going to give you a son.